Morning. On top of Yudam and Aleph, 10a. We're at Shaul Tanis Rufus Rosha Esr Bekiva, about 7-8 lines down. The wicked Roman general, whose name was Turnus Rufus, he had a question for Bekiva. He said, if your God loves the poor, why doesn't he give them something to eat? He said to him, so Bekiva says, so that he provides us the opportunity to save ourselves from punishment by giving money to the poor. He said to him, this is something that should put you in, this should giving charity is a reason to punish you. It's not a reason for rewards. Why? I'll give you an example, a parable. What is this comparable to? If you have a king that got angry on his slave, he locks him up in prison. And he punished him. He said people should not feed him. He should get a minimal amount of food or he should starve to death. He shouldn't get any drink. And one guy came along, and he gives him a drink and he gives him food. If the king finds out about it, that somebody's supporting his slave in prison, the king obviously is going to get very mad at him. And you are considered slaves, as the verse states, as the Jewish people are slaves to God. And therefore, when you support the poor, you're going against God's will. So you should be punished for that. You shouldn't be getting rewards. Rabbi Kiva says, I'll give you a better example. What's this comparable to? To a king that got angry on his son and locked his son up in prison. He said people shouldn't give him food or water. And one guy came along, and one guy came along and gave him food and drink. When the king finds out, presumably the king will send him a gift, because obviously it's the king's own son. He doesn't really mean that nobody should feed him. And the king, to the contrary, the king has to make the command, but he's very happy that somebody's supporting his son. He gives him a present, and we're considered sons of God. As the verse states, your sons to God. So Turnus Rufus wasn't done yet. He says, let's see. The Torah calls you slaves and sons. Which one? When you follow God's will, you're called sons. But when you don't listen to God, you're called slaves. But now the temple was recently destroyed. So clearly you're not doing God's will. If you're not doing God's will, you're called God's slaves. If that's the case, it should be punished for feeding the poor. Amar Loi, so Kiva says, no. The verse states you should give the poor bread to eat. And what's the next verse? And you should handle the fact that you're going to get quartering. You'll get soldiers that will sleep in your houses. When is it when is the time period where you'll have to quarter soldiers? It's now. The Romans forced the Jews to quarter their soldiers. And yet the verse says that you have to give charity to the poor. So clearly, even in this time, the Jews are still called the children of God. Darash Rabbi Yehudah, Rabbi Shalom. Rabbi Yehudah, Rabbi Shalom taught, "Kishem Shem is a noitziv shel adam k'tzuvin loy me'rosh Hashanah, kach chesron noitziv shel adam k'tzuvin loy me'rosh Hashanah." Just like a person's income is set from Rosh Hashanah, so too all of a person's losses are also set from Rosh Hashanah. So, meaning a person has a car accident or these types of losses, these losses are also set from Rosh Hashanah. Zacha, if he merits, meaning not just if he merits, but also if he gives charity, so then he can fulfill his losses by giving charity. So I mean, let's say God decrees a person has a certain amount of losses and he gives the money to charity. Those the charity money comes off the losses. We'll explain in a moment in more detail. If he doesn't give the money to charity, he'll give the money in quartering. Quartering is a type of loss. He has to put the soldiers up in his house. Kiha, like this story. The Bnei Achsid Rabbi Yochanan, there were these the sons of Rabbi Yochanan's sister. Now, obviously, we know Rabbi Yochanan's sister also married Rish Lakish. I don't know if it was that sister or maybe it was a different sister. This could be the sons of Rish Lakish, could be from a different sister. Rabbi Yochanan's nephews. Chazlu b'chalma, Rabbi Yochanan saw in a dream that they will suffer a loss of 700 dinarim. So what did Rabbi Yochanan do? He went to his nephews and he convinced them to donate a lot of the money to charity, like give very large donations. Asinu, he basically forced them to give the money to charity. Mm-hmm. He pushed them very hard. He managed to procure 683 dinarim of donations. There were 17 dinarim left. They didn't donate. The day before Yom Kippur came, that was the last chance. So the king sent in a messenger for the quartering and whatever, some taxes, and he collected the last 17 coins. Rabbi Yochanan sent them a message. Oh, this is Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai. So it wasn't Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai lived much earlier. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai is the teacher for Akiva. So he says to him, he said to them, don't be concerned. The 17 coins that you're supposed to lose was taken away from you. Like, don't worry about it. So they said to him, how do you know that there were 70 coins you were supposed to lose? So he says, I saw the dream. I knew that you were supposed to lose 700, and you've already given 683 to charity. So you have 17 left. So they said to him, if you would have told us you had a dream, we would have believed you, and we would have given the last 17 coins. So why didn't you tell us? He says, I wanted you to do the mitzvah for the right reasons. So meaning because I didn't tell you there was a dream, you didn't realize it was a dream. You gave the charity, you thought that your uncle was just kvetching to you, right? He was kvetching nonstop. He wanted donations. Truth is, I was saving you money. The money would have gone to the garbage anyway, but I wanted you to do the mitzvah for the right reasons. Therefore, I didn't tell you about this dream.
Have you seen this story before?
I don't remember. I certainly don't remember the story.
I don't remember.
The Kiveger points out the similar story appears in Medrash Rabbah and Parshas Vayikra, in the Chumash Vayikra, Parshas Lamed. And the story there is with the sons of the nephews of Shimon Yochai. But I don't see it. I don't see any link to the story. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Rav Papa have a solik b'darga. Rav Papa, this is now the Gemara talks a lot about the importance of charity, and this is pretty scary. Rav Papa have a solik b'darga. Rav Papa was climbing up the stairs. Ishtamet carry boiler maple. There was a loose step, and Rav Papa was about to tumble down the steps. So Amar, so he realized he was about to fall. I guess he was pretty quick thinking. And he said, okay, so the Talmud relates that if a person is liable for a certain death penalty, he'll often die in the manner similar to that death penalty. For example, if a guy is guilty of murder, the penalty for murder is decapitation. So what's going to happen to him? The sort of natural cause of his death, the way he'll die is that he'll be killed by the king, which usually involves decapitation, but not necessarily. If a guy was guilty of adultery, so the death penalty for adultery is strangulation. So then he would die, by some type of illness where he wouldn't have enough oxygen, something like some type of death similar to that. Now, let's say a guy is guilty of idol worship. The penalty, or violating Shabbos, the penalty is skila, is stoning. So how does he die? He dies by falling off a building. So Rav Papa says the guys who hate me are going to say that I'm dying for idol worship. because it's effectively similar to being stoned. He's falling down the steps. So he was very insulted. He was very hurt that he could have died basically by falling down the steps. And people would think that he died from idol worship. So Amalei Barav Medif to the Papa, so Chia Barav says for Papa, you don't have to be worried about it. You're trying to figure out why exactly you could have almost died this way. Shema Anibal Yadcha V'lai Parnasasai. It could be that there was a poor man that came to you and you did not give him food, and therefore it would have been worthy for you to die at such a death. Let's explain. The Tanya Reb Shimon Karcha Aimer, Reb Shimon Karcha taught, Kol hamalam einav min tzedakah ki'ilu oived avodas gechavim. Somebody who turns a blind eye to the poor, it's as if he worships idols. Ksiv hacha, the verse says here, Yisham l'cha panyeh dovrim levavcha b'li'al. Yeah. The verse here states that the year of Shemitah is coming, and you're not sure if there's enough. Basically, you'll have a thought of Belial, a bad thought. The thought is, I'm not going to give charity. And the type of person here is a person who is Belial. And the other verse here, refers to the people who live in a city that worship idols. And they're also called Bnei Belial. These are bad people. Just like when the verse refers to a city of idol worship, it refers to idol worship. So too, when the verse refers to somebody who's called Belial because he doesn't want to give charity, it's the same severity as idol worship. Tanya Amar B'Lazar Rabbi Yosef, Amar B'Lazar Rabbi Yossi, called Staka B'Chesed Yisrael Oisim B'Elam Hazeh, Shalom Gadol Praklitin Gedolim Ben Yisrael Lavi and Shabbat Shemayim. For all the charity and the acts of kindness, chesed, that Jews do, it creates a great peace and protective angels between God and the Jewish people. Shneimar Koimar Shem, this is the word of God. Al Tovei Beis Marzach, Val Terach L'Spoid, Val Torod Lahem, Ki Asafti Es Shloimi Me'esa Amazeh, Es Chesed V'Serachim. The second half of the verse is the key part. Ki Asafti Es Shloimi Me'esa Amazeh. I've gathered my peace from this people, as a chesed v'sarachim, because of the kindness and rachim, the compassion. Chesed, kindness, zugmilas chasadim, these are acts of kindness. Rachim and tzedakah, this is charity, and we see here it creates a tremendous amount of peace. And protective angels. Tanya Rabbi Yossi Aimer, Gedolah, one second. Tanya Rabbi Yehudah Aimer, Gedolah tzedakah shem kareves es geula. Tzedakah brings the redemption closer. Shnamar, as the verse states, Kaimar Hashem, this is the word of God. Shimru mishpat, be careful of judgment. Va'atsu tzedakah, and perform charity. He krovi Yeshua silave v'tzedkasi lihigalis, because my salvation is near, and my charity to redeem you is coming soon. Okay, how does it come soon? Because you're following the laws of tzedakah, of charity. There are 10 things that are hard. They're firm in some way, but all of them have a softening mechanism. Okay, so let's go through them. A mountain is kasha. It's hard, right? It's physically hard. However, what do you need to do? Barzel, you take an iron, an axe, or a chisel, mechatcha, you can cut through the mountain. Barzel kasha, an axe or a chisel is hard. But if you use a fire, it will soften it. Or kasha, fire is it's able to, it's powerful. It's able to soften steel or iron. Mayim chabad, but water can put it out. Mayim kashim, water is extremely powerful. Ovim soivlim, but the clouds can carry it. Ovim kashim, the clouds seem to be very powerful. Cover the sun. Ruach mefazrosam, but the wind comes, it spreads them out. Ruach kasha, the wind is very powerful. However, guf soivlei, the idea here, the way Rashi explains this, is that sort of the body is carried by ear. We carry the ear that's carried by the wind. The Gemara says, okay, well, guf kasha must be that the body is strong. However, how do you get rid of the body? Pachat shovrei, you make the person fearful, and it breaks the spirit. Pachat kasha, fear is able to break a spirit. However, there's a very simple solution to that. Yain mafigai. If a person drinks wine when he's scared, so it lessens the fear. So okay, so you think that wine is very powerful. However, shina mifachtasai, you sleep on it, it gets rid of the effect of the alcohol. Okay, and what's the most powerful? Umisa kashim mikulam. And death is more powerful than all of these. Death kills. Okay, and it's permanent. There's no, However, it's Dokam Atzelsim and Amisa, charity saves from death. The Chsiv, as the verse states, with Stoka, charity, Tatzim Mimavis, it saves from death. The rule of God is different than the rule of man. Midas Basar Dam, the king of flesh and blood, maybe during Godel Melech, Safik Mikabanai Himenu, Safik Mikabanai Himenu. A guy brings a bribe to the king, right? Maybe the king will take it, maybe he won't. Even if the king accepts the bribe, he may earn himself an audience, he may not. God is not like this. If a person gives a coin to the poor, he merits to see God's presence. Even if the gift is not so large, he merits God's presence, an audience with the king. Shenemar ani b'tzedek, me with charity, echa panecha, I witness your presence. Espa, I'm satisfied by being awakened to your image, to your form. That doesn't mean the form of God; it means to God's presence. Rabbi Elazar Yohev Putul Ani V'Hadar Matzli. Rabbi Elazar would give a coin to the poor, and then he would pray. And this is a custom that many have today. They give a coin before davening. Amar said, I will give with righteousness I will see your face. With charity I will pray before you. That's his interpretation. My esba what's the second half of the verse? In other words, because the scholars, they are constantly awake. They wake up early to come to Daf Yomi, right? And then, so therefore they merit, that's the Hoketz, that's the awakening. Therefore they merit to be satisfied with God's presence. In the world to come, where they merit to see God's presence. You want to be considered a lender to God, you want to lend God money, you give charity. The Gemara says it's such a wild verse. If not for the fact that the verse stated it, this would be impossible to state. Kaviyachol, it's as if a person becomes a lender to God. What does that mean? And we can evoke the other verse. What's the rule with a lender? Eved loyvel ishmalva. The borrower is considered a slave to the lender. You want to consider Kaviyachol, God to have to do your work. You lend God money. How do you do that? You give charity. It's wild. The verse states that hain, a large amount of money, won't help in a day of anger. However, charity will save you from death. Another verse, the treasures of the wicked won't be of assistance to him. However, but charity will save from death. Okay, this is two separate verses. The verse repeats itself. Charity will save from death twice. What exactly are these referring to? One protects from a misa mishuna. Misa mishuna is a very unlikely death. There's normal things people die from, mostly illness and old age, maybe car accidents today, and wars. But then there's, these freak accidents. The Stuckut saves the two deaths that Stuckut saves from is these freak accidents. Misa Mishuna is an extremely unlikely death, unusual death. And for the punishment of Gehenim. Which verse refers to Gehenim? The one that says the day of wrath. The day of wrath is that day, meaning the day of Gehenim. Which verse is referring to saving from an unusual death? I'm sorry. What type of charity saves you from an unusual type of death? This is a very interesting one. Okay. This is a very interesting type of charity. It's very hard. It's very, very difficult to do. Two things. Okay. Number one, the giver doesn't know that he's giving, and the receiver doesn't know that they're receiving. Okay. He gives, but he doesn't know who he's giving to. Remember, the story of Mar Ukva was that he used to give every day, used to put coins in front of a poor person's house. The poor person didn't know. One day, the poor person decided to wake up early and wait for Mar Ukva. Famous story, right? Mar Ukva dropped the coins. The guy opened the door. Mar Ukva ran. There's no place to run except for an oven. He jumped into the oven, right? And miraculously, he survived. Very nice story. But Mar Ukva's level of tzedakah was not the pinnacle of tzedakah. Why? Because he knew which poor person he was giving it to. Okay. However, there's another story. The story of Reb Abba. What was the story of Reb Abba? Reb Abba used to walk around town with the charity box hanging from his back, and it was open, and all the poor people were able to come and take the money out of the charity box. The problem there is that they knew who they were taking from. Also, not the pinnacle of tzedakah. Pinnacle of charity is that the giver doesn't know who he's giving to, and the receiver doesn't know who he's receiving from. Okay. 1 second. How do you do this? You give money to the local charity organization. In that case, the givers don't know who they're giving to, and the receivers don't know who they're receiving from, because they're all relying on the charity, the trustee, the guy who manages the fund. He's the one. He obviously does not fulfill this. He obviously is not doing the pinnacle charity because he knows both who's giving and also who's receiving.
But you can give to somebody else to do the same thing.
If he doesn't know, yeah.
Well, the steer on this is, how do you do those things where it said yesterday you get the 6 brachas for giving tzedakah and 11 brachas for being in front of the person and understanding the
So you wouldn't be able to do both at the same time.
Do that,
you wouldn't be able to do both of those at the same time. You won't be able to empathize with somebody asking for charity and at the same time not know who he is. I don't know. Maybe that's possible.
That's what I'm saying.
It's basically no. It's not a steer. They're two separate things. No. The other point also is listening to somebody who's collecting for charity is not. You're not actually giving him anything. You don't actually. You have the 11 blessings. I don't know if you have stuck at Tatzim Imavis. You're not giving him charity. You're not having any financial. You're just listening to him. Just talking to him. You're comforting him. It's a big mitzvah. You get 11 blessings for that. Right. And then separately, to give him charity, then there's different levels of charity.
Sure.
Okay, there's just one catch. This with this communal, we'll get to it in a moment. Okay, it's not the communal charity box is a very important thing. However, to get this type of tzedakah tatzim imavis, you have to have a trustee at a certain level of being a trustee. A guy has to be very reliable. What should a person do to merit male children? Rabbi Lozer says, give all his money to charity. Give a lot of it. Rabbi Shua says, Yismach ishto dvar mitzvah. He should make his wife happy for a dvar mitzvah. What's a dvar mitzvah here? It's a euphemism. It's referring to sexual intercourse. Rabbi Lozer, in other words, a person should be more concerned with his wife's needs in intercourse than his own needs. Rabbi Eliezer Yaakov says, La yitin adam putil aron kishal tzedakah, im came imun olav. Okay. 1 second. The second half of the question is really the important one. So now again, how does a person merit male children? First explanation. It's really the third one that's the question, right? So we saw 2 explanations so far. One is give a lot of money to charity. The other one is make your wife very happy, and the third one is so Rabbi Yaakov disagrees with Rabbi Lozer. Rabbi Lozer says you give a lot of money to charity. Rabbi Yaakov says no. You need to have a gabbai, a trustee that's as good as Rav Chanina ben Tradian. Okay, now 1 second. So this seems to be a contradiction. You're telling me you want to give money without knowing who the receiving is, and have the receiver receive without knowing who gives. You give money to the local charity, but what about the fact that Rabbi Yaakov says you need to have a custodian that's as good as Chanina ben Tradian? Somebody says, yeah, of course. We're talking about a scenario where the trustee is as good as Chanina ben Tradian. Ki kamrina de memani ala Chanina ben Tradian. Good. So in other words, in order to merit that level of tzedakah, the local organization has to be run exceedingly well.
So what's so great about Tani being present besides being honest?
I'm sorry.
Besides being honest, what is so great about Tani being?
Oh, what? There are a bunch of stories which I've been tried, but
No problem. That's
yeah.
great.
not for now. Yeah, you're one. Yeah, okay. So yeah, this is good. We don't have time for
No,
tangents here.
I'm trying to understand. That's fine.
No. What do you mean? No, in general, there's a lot of things to be said about Mitradian, but the greatness specifically as pertaining to our thing was his honesty. And I think it's more than honesty. I would say it's probably reliability, meaning what he said was reliable and it was valid. He
Okay.
did good investigations. He managed
did the investigations to see if they were needy or not.
right. So he managed it very well, which it's not just about honesty. Honesty is only one component. It's also investigations and reliability. And Amr Bavu says, Amr Moshe Negosh Baruch Hu, Rebbeinu Shalom, B'matarim Karen Yisrael. What should be done to increase the honor of the Jewish people? Amr Loi, God says to him, B'chisisa. They should give the half shekel coin today that's given as charity. But Amr Bavu says, Shalu Shlomo ben David. They asked Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, the son of King David, Ad Heichen Koichan Shel Tzedakah. How far is the power of charity? Amr Lahem Tzeu Re'u Ma Pirush David Abba. Let's go out and see what my father David said about it. He said, Pizar Nasan LeEvyonim. If he gives out his money to the poor, Evyonim, by the way, are the exceedingly poor. These are the unbelievably destitute. What happens? His righteousness lasts forever. Karanoi Torum Bekovaid, his honor will be raised up with his people will know about him and his honor. His honor will be increased. Rabbi Abba says from here, Hu Miroimim Yishkain Mitsudais Slam Miskavain. Lachmai Nosan Memo of Nemanim. Let's explain. Matam Miroimim Yishkain Mitsudais Slam Miskavain. Why is it that God will consider him elevated? Mitsudais Slam Miskavain, and he will consider him uplifted. Mishum, because the Lachmai Nosan, because he gave bread. Umeim of Ne'amanim, and his water was trustworthy, meaning he gave money to charity. V'Amar Bavu, Sholo Shlomo, they asked King Solomon, Ezehu ben ha'olam haba, who merits the world to come? Amar Lahem, he said, Kol shekeneged zekenav koved. Meaning those that are honored as when they're older, those are the people that merit the world to come. Yeah, we'll get to it in a second. He had the Yosef Breder of Yeshua Cholosh. If Yosef Breder of Yeshua became very ill, it's nugget. I think it's not means he died. Is that right?
Comatose.
In comatose. Okay. And I presumably that he recovered. So when he recovered, they said, when you were comatose, what happens? They said, his son said to him, what do you see? I saw an upside down world. El Yoinim, the uplifted Lamata, they were on bottom. Okay, what does El Yoinim here mean? Those that society respected because of their wealth. Those people today, in this world are respected, but in the next world, Lamata, they're on the bottom. And the destitute, the poor that were not respected, Lamala, those people are uplifted. Amar Loi, so the student, his son said to him, Olam Bor Isa, you saw a clear world. Okay, so the Gemara says, now this is true of the wealthy and the poor. What about those that study Torah? How do we know, like, where we, meaning the students that study Torah, how do they know where they are? For them, it's as is. Meaning the scholars that are respected in this world are respected in the next world as well. Okay. And I heard them say in heaven, praiseworthy is the one that comes to God, and his study is with him. Meaning he's familiar with the stuff he learned, and he's accomplished in his learning, in his Torah learning, a large amount of knowledge. Okay, and also and I've also heard them saying Haruge Malchus. Okay, we'll explain in a moment what this means. Haruge Malchus are those that are killed by the king. We'll define it in a moment. No, there is no person who hasn't been killed by the king is worthy of standing in their place. Meaning these people are like the greatest people in heaven. Nobody could stand in their presence. They're so uplifted. Maninu, what's an example of that? Let's say Rabbi Kiva and his friends. This presumably refers to the 10 people that were killed by the Roman emperors over the course of 100 years. Collectively, these are known as the Asara Harugi Malchus. Now, these were immense scholars. Every one of them was a great scholar, including Rabbi Kiva himself. So Gemara says, Mishum Harugi Malchus Sulai. You think Rabbi Kiva, nobody could stand in his presence because Rabbi Kiva was killed by the king? Rabbi Kiva was a great scholar without being killed by the king. That happened to have been the capstone of his life, and that in the end of it. But it wasn't the only reason why Rabbi Kiva was well respected and worthy to be in a great place in the world to come. Pshita, obviously, without being killed by the king, he also would have been in a very high place in heaven. So the Gemara says, no, El Harugi Lud. It refers to Lulinus and Papus, the two common people of Lud. What was the story? They made a sort of blood libel. There was a princess that was found dead. They accused the Jews of killing him, and they wanted to know which Jew killed the princess, and whoever otherwise they'd kill all the Jews. So two common Jews, regular people. These weren't particularly well known as scholars. One name was Lulinus, and the other name was Papos, and they were killed by Turnus Rufus. That was the general that we just spoke about in the beginning of the day. The general that engaged with Rabbi Kiva. Very wicked guy. Very brutal man as well. Interestingly enough, of course, his wife attempted to seduce Rabbi Kiva and eventually was not successful and eventually converted and married Rabbi Kiva. It's an interesting twist of events. Yeah. And it appears that Turnus Rufus was involved in the execution of Rabbi Kiva as well. So maybe he was trying to get his revenge there. Okay. Tanya. Rabbi Yechim told the students. If you remember from Pirkei Avos, Rabbi Yechim had a lot of discussions with his students. Right? He was well known for asking the students to go out and find a good pathway. In life. Okay. So he said to his students, charity will lift up a nation, goy, a single nation, always often refers to Jews. It's interesting because in the blessing in the morning, it doesn't, right? We say Shalai Sani goy. And it refers to non-Jews. But here it refers to Jews. V'chesed le'umim, and chesed, kindness to the nations, chatas is a sin. And then Rabbi Eliezer says, and he said as follows: Tzedakah Tramim Goy El Yisrael. This refers to the charity given by Jews. The Jewish people are called a Goy, a nation. And kindness for the nations is a sin. The charity and the kindness of the nations, it's a sin for them. They do it as a way to gather power. Which obviously is something anyone who follows the nonprofit world knows, that there's a lot of fields in nonprofit which the nonprofits are just used to aggregate power. These are not really nonprofits anymore. These are institutions that are power enterprises with a specific goal of using their power. Commotion ever, as the verse states, Dila heaven mihakrovin nichoichen lakash umatzlian lachai malko ubnoi udovid ubnoi. 1 second. Let's see. Sure, it's Aramaic from Daniel. Some Ezra. Okay. So they may offer pleasant sacrifices to the God of heaven. And they give the charity to increase their life, their life. Okay, so we see here that the charity is not given with the right intentions, it's given with the wrong intentions. So Gemara says 1 second. That means you're not allowed to give charity to live longer, but we learned, but is that not considered a form of charity? Vatanya, we learned, if The guy says, I'm giving a sell to charity so that my son lives, and so that I merit to go to the world to come. The guy is completely and utterly righteous. Okay, meaning that if a Jew gives money so that he should live longer, we call him a righteous person. So what's going on here? Which isn't? So Gemara says, "Loy kasher." It's not difficult. Can be Yisrael, can be Chavim. It depends whether it's a Jew or a non-Jew. Okay, Rashi explains that a Jew gives money to charity so that he lives long, and let's say he dies the next day. What does he think? That's what God's will was. He doesn't regret giving the charity. But a non-Jew gives money for longevity, and then he dies, and then he regrets giving the charity. Okay, next opinion. Then Rabbi Yeshua. So Rabbi Yeshua came along, the Amar, he said, okay, let's continue. Charity will uplift the nation. Who is like the Jewish people? One nation. And chesed, kindness to the nations, is a sin. All of the charity and kindness that the nations do, it is a sin for them. And the reason why they give charity is that they should be king for longer. Shenamar, as the verse states. Just a little bit of background here. This, I believe, is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was punished. He had to live like an animal for a year for destroying the temple. So he went, and he was foretold that in a dream that was what his punishment was going to be. He's going to live like an animal for a year. So he went to Daniel and he said to him, he said, "What should I do to atone for my sin?" So Daniel says, if you gather all the Jewish people and you feed them, then you'll be able to delay the punishment. He delayed it for 1 year. If you remember, we spoke about this in Schus Talmud Masechta Saita. Quoted this verse. So basically, the Gemara says that he gave the charity. He didn't really give the charity. He gave the charity because he didn't want to live like an animal. We didn't want to be an animal in the forest. And the verse here is Lehen Malki Shaper Alecha V'chitecha, your sin b'tzedakah paraik, you can redeem it. Sin b'avisecha b'mechan aniyim, and you can solve your sin by giving charity to the poor. Hein tevi ark lishlusecha. This will delay your punishment. Okay, finally, Nene Rabbi Gamliel says, he said, Tzedakah Goy, Tzedakah will uplift the nation. Eli Yisrael, this is the Jewish people. The Siv Mikam Yisrael, who's like the Jewish people. Goyachet ba'aretz, one nation. Okay, b'chesel mechatos. Why is a kindness for the nations a sin? Kol tzedakah b'chetzet sha'akam b'aisim. All of the kindness and charity the nations do, chetu lehen, it's a sin. Shein oisen el lehisyahar by. It's done for yuhara. It's done to make themselves great. They call them misyahar neifel b'gehenim. And anyone who tries to promote self-promotion, gaiva, goes to Gehenim. Shenemar zed yoher let shmai. People that are filled with gaiva, they end up in haughtiness. They end up in Gehenim, as this verse says, that they end up in Gehenim. Okay.